Welcome to the Thing About the Salem Witch Trials. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Today, we're going to explore the anatomy of a Salem witch trial. Our case study is Bridget Bishop. Last week, we covered Bridget's life and trial. This week, we analyzed the documents that presented the case against Bridget.
Through the selected documents, we can trace the steps of a witch trial, learn what counted as evidence in 1692, and see how Bridget reacted to being accused of witchcraft.
We're going to look at the warrant for Bridget's arrest, the record of her examination, a few of the statements, depositions, and testimonies submitted against her, court documents detailing her movements in the jail system, her physical examination for witches' teats, the indictments presented against her, the warrant for her execution, and records of effort to clear her name from 1710 to 2001.
What can we learn from these documents? Let's have a look at them. The warrant for Bridget's arrest was issued on April 18, 1692, and also called for the arrests of Giles Corey, Mary Warren, and Abigail Hobbs, based on a complaint made by Ezekiel Cheever and Constable John Putnam Jr. of Salem Village. This was the first time Bridget's name was referenced in any surviving document from the witch trials.
This document specifically states that Bridget is the wife of Edward Bishop, the sawyer from Salem, to differentiate from Edward Bishop Jr., the farmer from Salem Village, and his father. Bridget and the others were to be arrested on, quote, high suspicion of sundry acts of witchcraft, committed against 5 victims, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, who were the original core group of afflicted persons.
In addition to ordering arrests, the warrant instructed the Marshal of Essex County, George Herrick, to warn witnesses to attend the court hearings the next day. The witnesses were Margaret Knight, Elizabeth Nichols, Lydia Nichols, Jonathan Putnam, Hepzibah Ray, and John Hughes.
The warrant stated that the marshal had to bring the 4 suspects to Nathaniel Ingersoll's in Salem Village. Lieutenant Nathaniel Ingersoll kept an ordinary, an inn or tavern in the center of Salem Village. The many preliminary hearings and other court activities were also held there. This document was written by John Hathorne and signed by him and Jonathan Corwin. The 2 were Salem's magistrates, also known as Justices of the Peace. They were assistants, members of the upper house of the colonial legislature.
After making the arrest, George Herrick added a note to the warrant to confirm he had taken the suspects to Ingersoll's and warned the witnesses to attend the court that day.
Our next 2 documents cover Bridget Bishop's preliminary examination. The first was written by Ezekiel Cheever, a farmer and tailor from Salem Village, who was the son of Boston's schoolmaster. The second version was written by Salem villager Minister Samuel Parris, the uncle of Abigail Williams, who Bridget was charged with afflicting.
Ezekiel Cheever's version of this first hearing shows us the nature of the leading questions the magistrates asked. It also reveals Bridget's reaction to being arrested for witchcraft a second time. She had previously been tried for witchcraft in 1679, a fact revealed by another document that we're going to look at in just a moment.
During this examination, Bridget said, I am innocent. I know nothing of it. I have done no witchcraft. I never did hurt them in my life. I never did see these persons before. I am as innocent as the child unborn. I am not come here to say I am a witch to take away my life.
We also get a glimpse at one of the main controversies of 1692, the decision to accept spectral evidence as proof of witchcraft. In this evidence, a witness claims to have seen the witch's specter, which afflicted them and usually tried to get them to sign the devil's book and surrender their soul to the devil. In this case, ragged tears in Bridget's coat were seen as proof that Jonathan Walcott had stabbed her specter with his sheathed sword.
From the record of this examination, we also see how the afflicted persons behaved in court, what kind of antics they did get up to as they experienced or perhaps staged their afflictions in the presence of the physical witch. We see how the afflicted reacted to Bridget's every glance, every movement, mimicking her movements, and claiming to be afflicted when she moved and every time she looked at them.
In Samuel Parris's telling of this examination, we learn that Bridget claimed never to have been to Salem Village, which is actually possible, even though Salem Town and Salem Village are next to each other. There was no practical need for her to go to the village. her life was in Salem town.
Bridget told the magistrates, "I am innocent to a witch. I know not what a witch is," and said, "I am clear. If I were any such person, you should know it." She stated that she was not troubled by the afflicted people's supposed suffering and didn't know what to make of their behavior.
The evidence presented against Bridget Bishop was entirely testimonial. It was statements, depositions, and testimony made by her neighbors and the afflicted persons. We're going to look at three forms that this evidence took in Bridget's case. There's the spectral evidence kind, there's evidence of past harm, and there's statements made by other accused people who had themselves falsely confessed to witchcraft.
To get a taste of spectral evidence, we turn to the May 17th statement of Susanna Sheldon versus Philip English, Sarah Buckley, Mary Whitridge, Bridget Bishop, Giles Corey, Mary English, and Martha Corey. Susanna claimed that the specters of Bridget Bishop, Philip English, and Goodman Corey appeared to her at night with a black man with a high-crowned hat.
The specters carried the devil's books and asked Susanna to touch one so her name would be added. Then a streaked snake crept over Bridget's shoulder and into her bosom. Mary English appeared and had a yellow bird in her bosom, and Giles Corey put 2 turtle doves to his chest and let them feed. Bridget Bishop and Giles Corey then knelt before the black man and prayed. The black man here is obviously Satan.
2 nights later, allegedly Bridget Bishop came back with some friends. She told Susanna she had killed 4 women, and Martha Corey nursed a thing like a black pig with no hair. For evidence of harm that happened years ago, we can study the June 2nd testimony of John Louder versus Bridget Bishop, in which John describes events from 7 or 8 years ago.
Back then, John had a disagreement with Bridget because her chickens were scratching up the garden at the house where he lived, which was John Gedney's house. He's the brother of Bartholomew Gedney, who becomes a judge on the Oyer and Terminer court that tries Bridget. So, following this disagreement over chicken scratch, a mysterious event occurred. John woke in the night to pressure on his chest, opened his eyes to see Bridget Bishop, who was illuminated by the glow from the moon. She prevented him from moving and choked him, continuing to oppress him until it was nearly day again.
And John was not the only person to experience a nocturnal visit from Bridget's specter. The oppression can be explained by what we understand now of sleep paralysis. If John and the other men who had reported this encounter with Bridget's specter experienced sleep paralysis, they would have been in a dreamlike state somewhere between waking and sleep, during which their bodies were still asleep and they could not move. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying experience.
John's boss, Susanna Gedney, confronted Bridget about coming and sitting on him, which Bridget denied. John affirmed the story to her face, and Bridget allegedly made an unspecified threat.
On Sunday, John stayed home sick, and his room was allegedly invaded by a black pig, which vanished when he tried to kick it. Weirder still, a creature came in through the window. Quote, "The body of it looked like a monkey, only the feet were like a cock's feet with claws, and the face somewhat more like a man's than a monkey's. This comes through the window, disappeared when he tried to clap his hands around it, and comes back through the door. He scares it off by attempting to strike it with a stick. This sounds a lot like a chicken in a garden."
And so the third type of testimony we would like to cover are the confessions of other people accused of witchcraft. For an example, let's review the May 3rd examination of Deliverance Hobbs in prison. In this testimony, Deliverance, who's the stepmother of confessed teenager Abigail Hobbs, discusses Bridget Bishop, whom she refers to as Goody Oliver, Bridget's name from a previous marriage. According to Deliverance, Bridget had tempted her to sign the Devil's Book a second time because Deliverance had already said that she signed it another time, and Bridget had taken part in a spectral feast in the room where Deliverance was being held in Salem's jail.
The historical record also gives us the minimus, a document used to order the placement of Bridget Bishop to the custody of a jailer. This minimus shows us that on May 12th, Bridget Bishop and 9 other accused were sent to the Boston prison. The May 23rd census of prisoners shows she was still in Boston.
Further corroboration of her time in Boston can be found in John Arnold's bill to the province for his services. This says that she was there from May 12th to the first week of June. Because she was present in Salem at her trial on June 2nd, we know she was transferred May 31st or June 1st.
There's also a preserved letter of Thomas Newton, the new Attorney General, dated May 31st, 1692. It orders people transferred from Boston jail to Salem, showing impatience with the speed of the trials. Though looking at this history today, we would consider it very speedy. It also mentions he felt he saw strange things during the 7 examinations he attended May 31st. Thomas asks for records from the 1679 case against Bridget Bishop. Remember, this is not Bridget's first witchcraft case.
One of the things the record preserves is the physical examinations on June 2nd. A jury of women and a male surgeon searched Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, and Elizabeth Proctor for witch marks and reported that they found a preternatural excrescence of flesh between the pudendum and the anus, much like to teats and not usual in women, in all 3 women near the same place. This was at about 10 a.m. But then later at 4 p.m., Bridget was pronounced clear and free of any preternatural excrescence.
The same day, the prosecution presented the grand jury with 5 indictments of Bridget Bishop for afflicting Mary Lewis, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, and Ann Putnam Jr.
It's important to note that Bridget was not indicted for covenanting the crime of making a pact with the devil, as some others accused of witchcraft in 1692 were. Massachusetts law said, if any man or woman be a witch, that is, hath or consulteth with a familiar spirit, they shall be put to death.
The presumption being made here is that afflicting was proof of a diabolical pact, because that is how witches got power. Also, she was noted to have a teat at one point, which would also be evidence to them. The creatures which beset John Louder may have been seen as Bridget's familiars, or as Bridget herself, as witches could change shapes.
The indictments, I want to point out, also state that the grand jury found them billa vera, which means true bill, that there was enough evidence to go to trial. And her trial took place the same day, June 2nd. We don't have primary records of the trial itself. Those have disappeared. But we do have records that tell us what happened at the trial. And we'll be looking at those. So a June 8th document gives us some clarity about what happened there. And we have the testimonies that are labeled as sworn in court. And we have the warrant for Bridget's execution that tells us a little bit more about what happened.
It does feel speedy how quickly we started at the beginning of these documents, and here we are at the warrant for her execution. This warrant, a stark and sad document, was written by Attorney General Thomas Newton and recaps the flow of Bridget's grand jury hearing and trial.
As we discussed, Bridget was tried June 2nd on 5 counts of using, practicing, and exercising certain acts of witchcraft in and upon the bodies of Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard.
The victims were, quote, hurt, afflicted, pined, consumed, wasted, and tormented, contrary to the form of the statute, in that case, made and provided.
And the English Witchcraft Act of 1603 used this kind of language. It stated that any witchcraft, enchantment, charm, or sorcery whereby any person shall be killed, destroyed, wasted, consumed, pined, or lamed in his or her body, or any part thereof, was a felony punishable by death.
The prosecution did not even have to prove that pining, consumption, or wasting had taken place, only that actions tending towards these conditions had been taken.
According to an October 8th, 1692 letter of Thomas Brattle, when the chief judge, William Stoughton, gave the first jury their charge, he told them that they were not to mind whether the bodies of the said afflicted were really pined and consumed, as was expressed in the indictment, but whether the said afflicted did not suffer from the accused such afflictions as naturally tended to their being pined and consumed, wasted, etc. This, said he, is a pining and consuming in the sense of the law. And so this is saying that their bodies don't have to look like they've been hurt physically. You don't have to actually see any physical hurt or illness or injury on their part. You just have to agree that somebody did some witchcraft that tended towards them being pined, wasted, and consumed, but that they're being hurt, whether you can see it or not, basically, is what the standard is. So you just go along with their hurt is witchcraft, indict.
And isn't this an example of how we see in court cases judges telling juries how to look at the evidence? We still see that today.
And we see it from William Stoughton in the case of your ancestor, Rebecca Nurse, when he tells the jury to go back and reconsider their not guilty verdict twice. So they come back with a guilty.
We also learn from the death warrant that Bridget pleaded not guilty and put herself on trial by God and her country. She was found guilty of the felonies and sentenced to death.
The warrant ordered the new sheriff of Essex County, George Corwin, in one of his first official acts to execute Bridget on Friday, June 10th, between 8 a.m. and noon, at the place of execution, which is not specified in any of the documents. And Bridget was to be hanged by the neck until dead.
On June 10th, the sheriff wrote his return on the document and confirmed that Bridget was hanged during the appointed window. Curiously, Corwin wrote that Bridget had been buried in the place of execution, but then he scratched through that statement.
And to this day, we do not know what became of Bridget's body. Another interesting document in this case is the account for payment submitted by Boston jailkeeper John Arnold on September 12, 1692. This shows that Bridget was in Boston jail for 20 days, beginning May 12th, as we discussed above. What's interesting here is she was assessed a rate of £2, 7 shillings per week, which totaled £7 at the end of those 20 days of her stay. This was billed to her husband, Edward. On September 13th, 1710, Nehemiah Jewett, who was on a commission considering the restitution payments for the victims and their families, he wrote a letter to Stephen Sewell, who was also involved in that process and had been the clerk of the Court of Orient Terminer back in 1692. And Nehemiah informed Stephen that 6 women who were hanged in 1692 did not have any family come forth to petition for restitution or the reversal of their attainders, which legally bound their property.
At the time of this letter, families of witch trial victims were submitting their claims to receive compensation from the provincial government.
These 6 women were not cleared until relatively recently. Anne Pudiator was named in resolution in 1957, which removed the infamy from her name and assured descendants there was no cause to feel shame for her conviction. One of Anne Pudiator's descendants had pushed for this for 12 years, starting in 1945. He went to the legislature every year to get this passed. In 1957, they passed it, but they only gave a name to his ancestor.
Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Alice Parker, Wilmot Red, and Margaret Scott were generically included in the 1957 resolution in a line that said, quote, "Ampudiator and certain other persons."
The 5 other women were not named in legislation until this century. On October 31st, 2001, Massachusetts Governor Jane Swift signed an act which added the 5 women's names to the 1957 resolution.
That's when Bridget Bishop got her exoneration.
2001, only 309 years after her execution.
If you enjoyed going through documents like this, we do something special like this for our subscribers. Go to facebook.com/Salem Witch Hunt. We will be posting document reviews like this periodically for our subscribers. Join us.